When my wife, Clara, and I bought the old farmhouse, we thought we'd found our forever home. It was a charming two-story building, nestled among rolling hills, with a history that stretched back over a century. We were so excited to start our new life there, away from the hustle of the city. The first few weeks were pure bliss. We painted walls, fixed creaky floorboards, and planted a garden. It felt like we were breathing new life into the old place. But then, we noticed the stain. It was in the master bedroom, right in the center of the original hardwood floor. A dark, ugly blotch about the size of a dinner plate. It looked like something had been spilled and left to soak in for years. I remember Clara saying, "Well, that's our first project." We weren't worried. A bit of sanding, a bit of varnish, and it would be gone. So we got to work. I spent an entire Saturday on my hands and knees, scrubbing and sanding that spot until my arms ached. By the end of the day, the floor looked pristine. The stain was completely gone, replaced by the beautiful light grain of the wood. We celebrated with a glass of wine, proud of our handiwork. The next morning I woke up and the first thing I saw was the floor. My heart sank. The stain was back. It was fainter than before, like a shadow, but it was unmistakably there, in the exact same spot. Clara saw it too. "How is that possible?" she whispered. I had no answer. We tried again. This time, we used heavy-duty chemical cleaners, things that promised to remove any stain known to man. We scrubbed until the smell filled the entire house, and we had to open all the windows, and again, for a little while it worked. The floor was clean, but by the next morning the shadowy blotch had returned, as if mocking us. This went on for weeks. We tried everything. We consulted flooring experts. We looked up old home remedies. We even considered replacing that section of the floor entirely, but nothing worked. Every morning, the stain would be there, a silent, persistent guest in our home. It was starting to get under our skin. Clara started having nightmares. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, talking about a dark shape in the room. I tried to reassure her, telling her it was just the stress of the move, the frustration with the stain. But deep down, I was starting to feel it too. A sense of unease had settled over the house, a feeling that we weren't alone. The nights grew colder as autumn set in. The wind would howl around the old house, making the windows rattle and the floorboards creak. One night I was jolted awake by a sound. It was a soft, wet, scraping noise. It seemed to be coming from downstairs. I thought it might be a branch scratching against the house, or maybe a mouse in the walls. I told myself to go back to sleep, but the sound was persistent. Reluctantly, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Clara. The floor was cold under my bare feet. As I crept out of the bedroom, I glanced at the stain. My blood ran cold. It looked different, darker, and it seemed larger. I shook my head, telling myself my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark. I made my way downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The scraping sound continued, and it was definitely coming from the living room. I peeked around the corner, my hand shaking as I reached for the light switch. I flipped it on, flooding the room with light. There was nothing there. The room was empty. The sound had stopped. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence, feeling foolish. It must have been the wind. I turned off the light and headed back upstairs, my adrenaline slowly receding. As I reached the top of the stairs, I froze. A sliver of moonlight was cutting through the bedroom window, illuminating the floor, and the stain, it had definitely grown. It was no longer just a circular blotch, it was elongated now, stretching across the floorboards. I could feel a primal fear creeping up my spine. I didn't tell Clara. How could I? She was already on edge. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, that I was just tired and stressed. The next day I measured it. I took a photo with my phone, drawing a mental line around its edges. I told myself it was a control, a way to prove to myself that I was being irrational. But throughout the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The house felt different, colder. That night, the scraping sound returned, louder this time. It was a sickening, dragging sound. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, listening to it move through the house below. Clara slept soundly beside me, oblivious I didn't dare move. I just listened until the sun started to rise and the sound faded away. The first thing I did when I got out of bed was check the floor. My stomach churned. The stain had spread again. I pulled out my phone and compared it to the photo from the day before. There was no doubt it was larger, its edges creeping outwards like a dark tide, and its shape ... It was changing. It was no longer just a random splotch, it was beginning to take on a form. A long, thin shape with appendages branching out. It was horrifyingly, unmistakably starting to look like a human silhouette. A body lying face down on our bedroom floor. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't a chemical reaction. This wasn't old wood. This was something else, something malevolent. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in a chair in the corner of the room, watching the stain, my phone in my hand, ready to call for help, though I didn't know who I would call. The scraping sound started just after midnight. It wasn't downstairs this time. It was in the hallway, right outside our door. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. It was slow, deliberate. It sounded heavy, wet. I could hear it getting closer and closer to our bedroom door. I held my breath, my eyes locked on the door handle. I watched in absolute terror as the handle began to turn. Slowly, silently, the door creaked open, just a few inches. There was nothing there but darkness, but I could feel a cold draft and a smell of damp earth and decay. And then I saw it. From under the door, a dark, viscous liquid began to seep into the room. It was black as tar. It flowed silently across the floor, moving with a horrifying purpose. It wasn't spreading randomly. It was flowing directly towards the stain in the center of the room. I watched, frozen in my chair, as the black liquid reached the edges of the silhouette and began to merge with it. The stain darkened, became more defined, its shape growing more solid, more real. The silhouette was becoming three-dimensional, rising from the floorboards. It was the shape of a person, contorted in an unnatural posture, its limbs bent at impossible angles. The scraping sound was in the room with us now, the sound of this thing pulling itself from the wood. I wanted to scream, to run, to grab Clara and get out, but I was utterly paralyzed by fear. The shape continued to rise, its form coalescing from the darkness on the floor. It was no longer just a stain, it was a presence, and it was in our room. I finally found my voice, and a scream tore from my throat. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated terror, because I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we hadn't just bought a house, we had inherited its grave.